Hi, welcome back. So in this lecture, we're going to cover Abraham Maslow's theory of self-actualization. Humanistic psychologists emphasize the importance of basic human urges, and humans, of course, are animals. So human urges are important in humans, but of course, humans are much more than that. So although we do prefer food, drink, sex, we also value wisdom, creativity, insight, and communication. And so many theorists in this area speak of three aspects of human nature. There's biological, social, and self-fulfilling or personal. Being deprived of companionship or being deprived of meaning for one's life can be just as detrimental as being deprived of food. Self-actualization is defined by an innate process by which a person realizes their full potential. And very few achieve full self-actualization, although there's some people that do become highly self-actualized, and many do go far along that path. Interestingly, the idea of self-actualization was proposed by Carl Jung. And unlike humanistic psychologists, Jung believed that unconscious forces were important, but he also believed in a human tendency to integrate the various unconscious forces with becoming a whole person. And so this was more about meeting every type of need, but also including the more spiritual needs of human beings. And so in this way, through self-exploring and dealing with dark forces within us, a person can live in harmony with nature and with all of humanity. So Abraham Maslow was known for his work on self-actualization. As a child, he endured a terrible relationship with a strict mother who often engaged in bizarre behaviors. And he described himself in his early childhood as shy, bookish, and erotic. But he did not remain this way or become self-hating in any way. And he actually realized his self-potential when he became a leading humanistic psychologist. So that sort of inspired him to have a lot of positive societal influence. And so, with his work on self actualization, he described people that tend to achieve this as having these peak experiences. And we all have peak experiences. It's these special moments where we might be listening to something like a moving piece of music or experiencing a tremendously sensual artistic moment. And when we do experience it, it can happen at any time where everything just seems to fall into place. And at such meaningful times, people seem to transcend the self and be at one with the world. And so at that moment, they feel completely self-fulfilled because of this positive, meaningful experience. And so he believed that um, that these positive experiences were a significant aspect of personality. And so these experiences are transcendent moments of pure joy and elation. And they're moments that stand out from everyday events. And so the memory of these events is lasting, and people often liken them to a spiritual experience. And so he categorized self-actualized people as having these peak experiences quite often. And so the average person may have these experiences, once in a while, but self-actualized people have them way more frequently. And so that's sort of what got him interested in how we achieve those feelings of fulfillment, of self-potential, and being our best self. Maslow believed that the natural tendency or pressure towards self-actualization comes from within the organism. So it's coming from inside rather than from outside due to the internal nature and individual qualities. And so it's the individual is able to naturally unfold. And so this is called an organismic theory because it assumes the unfolding or life course of each organism. However, the motivation to grow and self-actualize is different from hunger drives, sex drives, or relieving tension. So those are necessary for survival. Everyone feels hungry, and so they eat in order to survive. However, motivations to become one with the world and achieve full potential is not necessarily needed for survival. And so whether this organismic unfolding is genetically determined or is more complexly influenced is not really clear. So we do assume that there is an evolved tendency for growth, and that is where we see the influence of Darwin's work on humanistic approaches. And so Darwin proposed natural selection, and that we adapt to the environment, and whoever adapts to the environment survives. So his influence is felt in existential humanistic psychology because it does play a role in the individual qualities that allow somebody to adapt to their environment. And so Darwin did note the uniqueness of each individual and the importance of each individual characteristics that make us who we are in achieving this self-actualization. And so individual variation does form the basis for natural selection. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a motivational theory in psychology comprising a 5-tier model of human needs. And these lower level needs must be met first before higher needs can be fulfilled. And so these are depicted as hierarchical levels within a pyramid. And so the D needs are the most basic needs that have to be met first before we can actually achieve self-actualization. So Maslow divided these organismic needs into 2 categories. And so first he identified several categories of deficiency needs, also known as D needs or D motives. And these are the needs necessary for survival. So the D needs include physiological needs, safety needs, love, and esteem needs. So the physiological needs are the basic biological necessities, such as water, food, sex, and shelter. And then the so-called safety needs are needing to be in a predictable world, needing security, and being in a world that makes sense. Then there's belongingness and love needs, which involve being intimate and having relationships with other people. And then self-esteem needs involve gaining respect from others and self-respect. So all of these D needs motivate us through deficits. We need something to fulfill a drive or a void in order to reestablish homeostasis. And then the correct social conditions are needed to encourage the highest level of self-actualization. And so the next level is the being level, which can't be achieved without achieving the D needs first. And so if we're preoccupied with satisfying our more basic needs, we're not going to achieve our being level or self-actualized level. And so in other words, we can't fulfill this complete human potential and search for truth if we're lacking food or safety or love. And then the transcendence needs are based on meeting our spiritual needs, and they go beyond the self. So they go beyond our biological needs or our needs for love and safety. The modern revision of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is coming from evolutionary psychologists. And so this new proposed model retains the basic immediate physiological needs as the core first priority. And then the motivation to obtain food and shelter as well. But the one difference with the newer model is that evolutionary psychologists are proposing to replace self-actualization with parenting at the top level, because the criterion of evolution is to reproduce and passing your genes onto offspring. And so you might argue that parenting does have overlap with self-actualization, but Maslow did not have this in mind. So he was mainly concerned with transcendence and being beyond the self. And so he was more focused on the spiritual nature of human development and being, and achieving our full potential for self-actualization. And so this parenting was more about the evolutionary aspect. What is the ultimate goal? And the ultimate goal is to reproduce. And so you must meet all of these needs in order to continue reproduction. Researchers wanted to test whether there was evidence for Maslow's humanistic conceptualization theory of self-fulfillment. And in order to do this, they tested whether or not self-actualized people are more physically and mentally healthier compared to average people, or compared to people that don't achieve self-actualization. And so Maslow used assessment techniques such as interviews, observations, and self-reported questionnaires. He also used projective tests, and this, helped understand self-actualized people and the different traits they have. He found that self-actualized people were more independent and they were more resistant to social pressures. They were more spirited and loved freedom, and they had a higher need for privacy. He also found that their personalities were more complex, and they, because of that, they may be more difficult to find, access, and evaluate. And so, because of that, there were a lot of loose problems with these assessments. Although it provided insight and perspective into the qualities of self-actualization, oftentimes they were difficult to develop scientifically verifiable conclusions. So there were other tests, other self-reported questionnaires that did attempt to be more rigorous. One particular assessment was known as the Personal Orientation Inventory. And this was an inventory that asked people to classify themselves on a number of dimensions, including whether they felt they could develop intimate relationships with others, whether they were spontaneous and uninhibited, and just asked them a whole bunch of questions that asked them to rate the extent to which they saw characteristics in themselves. And these characteristics resembled self-actualization. And it also assessed whether the person lived optimistically and realistically in the present, as opposed to worrying excessively about the past or the future. And so research using this inventory has shown to be able to identify people whose life orientations and behaviors are in line with what Maslow's theory proposed. Maslow's hierarchy of needs inspired a lot of early psychologists to focus attention on happy individuals and their psychological trajectory. So research confirms that happy people who feel mildly or moderately happy most of the time are not enthralled by materialistic things such as acquiring a big house or a car or fashionable furnishings, etc. And they also have shown that injury and adverse circumstances did not necessarily make them unhappy. The research also shows that generally happy people are more resilient to adverse life circumstances. And so chronic happiness tends to be driven by internal psychological mechanisms. It's not that these people have a better life or have more things in their life, but rather they are more rational and see things as always working out for the best. In addition to that, perceived financial situations and perceived control over life affect happiness. and these are not directly related to one's objective circumstances. And so some people simply seem more chronically more happy, but again, this is due to the way they are perceiving their own adverse life circumstances, stress, and situations. One echo of the existential dilemma that tends to happen in modern affluent countries is this conflict between the pull and support of the community versus the individual freedom that wealth allows. So rather than living close to many neighbors in cities, many well-off people spread out to the suburbs and they, vacation in remote retreats. And so oftentimes with people that don't have community are often more depressed and lonely compared to people that are with others and have a sense of community but may not have as much individual freedom. And so this is called the American paradox, which claims that our stubborn dilemmas remain between wanting wealth and individual freedom versus community. And so as a result of wanting and having individual freedom, we end up with decreasing community ties, and so that can also decrease our happiness and our self-fulfillment. An area of modern personality has turned towards exploring positive forces of life, and this is known as positive psychology. So positive psychologists explore people's creativity, hope, wisdom, happiness, and spirituality, and they're less focused on aggression, weakness, and pathology. And so in this area of psychology, more attention is given to how people can cope with their misfortunes through a self-healing process. So how to promote self-healing by helping people achieve emotional stability, balance, and self-fulfillment. So also there's increasing attention to where true joy comes from and how people achieve true joy. There's some theories that show true joy and fulfillment come from using talents, and this can help promote healthy psychological growth. So using the totality of your being to strive for important accomplishments. There is increasing attention to patterns that also prevent an unhealthy personality from developing and ways to promote better health and emotional growth, as well as attention to how and why some people can be resilient in stressful situations or crises. And so positive psychologists are aiming to explore true joy and how a person can become more resilient to stress and adversity, and what are some of the qualities that these people exhibit in their everyday lives. Positive psychologists are also interested in studying flourishing. And so what is the meaning of a good life and a healthy personality, and what makes people continue to be unbroken and flourish in life? And so they're interested in what types of life philosophies do these types of people have that flourish in life, and what makes life worth living. The psychologist Martin Seligman proposed a 5-component approach to flourishing known as the PERMA model. These 5 parts are known as positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. Positive emotion encompasses the good moods and feelings that motivate us. Engagement captures notions of flow. Relationships are our close ties to family, friends, and our community. Meaning involves dedication to or working towards things greater than ourselves. And accomplishment means setting goals and productively attaining those key goals, which is part of the Maslow's self-actualization theory. And so flourishing is a term that goes well beyond our happiness and our feeling good. It's more about achieving our full potential. So, in further evaluating key aspects between existential approach and humanistic approach, they have several main key components to each. The existential approach places responsibility for personality on the individual. And so it's the exploring people's possibilities for the triumph of the human spirit. The humanistic approach is conducive to cross-cultural studies and the studies of ethnic groups, and they're willing to explore alternative views of what it means to be human. So, to summarize, humanistic, existential, and positive approaches to what makes personality. We now know from this lecture that existentialism is an area concerned with the meaning of human existence, and it is a non-deterministic approach. So this means that existentialists emphasize the existence of the individual person as a free and responsible agent, determining the development through acts of free will. And so we are responsible for our own decisions and what we create. The humanistic approach is a philosophical movement that emphasizes our values and the human personal worth. And self-actualization is our innate process by which we grow spiritually and realize our own unique potential.